Oh, hello. Welcome to the 2013 Hundie Challenge. Today we're going to be discussing The Kingston Trio by Lawrence of Arabia. Dee-doo-dee-doo-doo, dee-doo-dee-doo-dee-doo-dee-doo-doo, dee-doo-dee-doo-doo, dee-doo-dee-doo-dee-doo-doo-doo. So let me show you something. See how thick this book is? And I know you can't really tell from the video, but can you see how closely packed those words are? I've gone over this before on a couple of other books on this series, and I will go over it again with the last book, I can guarantee you that. But this is not a book. This is not a book called the Alexandria Quartet. It is not a novel about a four-piece jazz band in Alexandria or anything like that. It is a tetralogy, or as the makers of Alien would have you believe, the made-up word quadrilogy. Yes, this is 4 books under a single cover, not unlike the Studs-Lonigan trilogy or the USA trilogy, which I've already read this year. This was a 880-page tome, which consisted of 4 separate novels. So, as you can tell at this point, I've read far more than 100 books already this year, and it keeps pissing me off every time that it comes up, because it's like, why did I do this to myself? You know, I could have taken this at my own pace. Of course, I set this standard for myself. But, you know, why did the Modern Library... Sometimes they would take a single volume, like the Magnificent Ambersons, which I think was the second in that series, and that would take up 1 spot. And sometimes they would take 4 books and have that take up 1 slot. Sometimes they would take 3 books and have that take up 1 slot. And as we'll find out on book 100, sometimes they would take 12 books and have that take up 1 slot. So I'm about sick and tired of this shit. But anyway, let's talk about the actual book itself. So this, as I said, is 4 books about Alexandria. This is the hardest book that I had to find this year. You'll see there's no library, barcode or anything on that. That's because I asked for the Alexandria Quartet, and when I learned that it was actually a tetralogy, each of the individual books in the Alexandria Quartet, and my library advised me that there was no library in the United States, where I live, which had all 4 of these books. And in fact, only one of them, Mount Olive, the 3rd one, was anywhere in the U.S. And they sent me this. I feel terrible because it probably cost the library money, but I wasn't going to read the 3rd book out of order. So I finally had to buck up and pay the money to order this off of eBay, presumably from England or some fucking where. They did tell me that it was apparently available in Mexico, but they weren't going to go to that kind of trouble. So this is the kind of shit that I've had to go through behind the scenes. And I know, I haven't even started talking about the book yet. So since I went to this much trouble, I'm sorry to say that this was not a stupendously good book, or series, I should say more accurately. It was fair to middling. I was pleased, as I've mentioned a couple times, most of these books are kind of like what I falsely call Regency-era England, even though I know that's not the right term. Kind of that Howard Zinn style of English turn-of-the-century living. That's what most of the books on this list have been. So I'm always delighted when we really get outside of that and get to a different location. Like, A House for Mr. Biswas was in Trinidad. So this series was about Alexandria, Egypt, which is apparently a very unusually cosmopolitan city, where I think it said in the book that there were 4 traditions, which perhaps is why it led to the quartet. Greek, Jewish, Muslim, and Coptic Christian, I want to say. I may be messing that up, but apparently there's 4 very different cultures that blend and merge and sort of make Alexandria what it is today, or in this case what it was in the 40s. So it's nice that this was a very unusual venue. Certainly one I've never read about, I don't think. I think I maybe know that there was the Library of Alexandria there. I know Alexander the Great conquered it, named it after himself. That's about the extent of what I know about Alexandria. Seriously, that, like 2 sentences that I just told you there. This book had some interesting cultural moments, like the Copts, the Coptic Christians, Nassim and Nowruz, I want to say, kind of talked about how important the Copts were in Egypt, but that the British and the French, when they came in the colonial period, had suppressed them and kind of turned the Muslim majority against them. So whereas before the British came along, the Copts were really important and powerful, they were kind of subdued, I guess, and they blamed the British for this. As for the story itself, it was very hard to follow. They kind of went back and forth in time. So each book had a different time frame, and like somebody would, die in one book, and in the next book they'd be alive, and you go, oh, well, I guess we're talking about a different time in the past. Excuse me. So it was difficult to follow and difficult to read, very dense and complicated, and that may be because it's an unfamiliar place and time. I think it's a shame because the very most interesting parts of this book were at the very end. I almost want to say like the last 100 pages or so was when it finally started to really catch my interest, and that would be the 4th book, Clea. And there was this long, I don't know if it was a analogy or a fable or something about this guy that created, they call them homunculi, so like little human-sized fairies, I guess, in jars. And there was this long fable about this scientist that created homunculi and created a book like Nostradamus' prophecies based on what the homunculi told him. And you're trying to figure out whether this is about, you're trying to figure out what the meaning of this is, whether it's just a shaggy dog story or what. And then the almost death of Clea, I actually was pretty sure, because it was so close to the end of the book, that it was going to be her death, but she goes off swimming, and Balthazar, who another one of the books is about Balthazar, although how these books were divided up I can't tell you, because I think some of them were written by Darley, who was never had a book about himself, so it was all in first person, but people hardly talked about him at all. So it wasn't like Balthazar was written by Balthazar and Clea was written by Clea. It was really fucking complicated. But what happened was Balthazar knocked the harpoon gun or something, and while Clea was swimming, and they all thought that she was killed. And so the hero, Darley, had to jump into the water and save her. And it was this really breathtaking scene and sequence. Of course, you had to read the first 700 pages to get it to any of this interesting stuff. So I'm afraid I can't rate it very highly. It was probably a solid 3 stars. Kind of a not worth the effort kind of book. But maybe if you're really interested in semi-modern Egypt, you'll enjoy it. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.